So right now I'm inviting Aishwarya to come and start off with the presentation. Aishwarya Tipnis is the principal architect of an eponymous architectural practice based in New Delhi, India. She is the recipient of the highest civilian honor in the culture sector, the insignia of Chevalier des Arts, the literate Knight of the Arts and Letters by the government of France in 2018 for her outstanding commitment to preservation of French heritage in India. An alumnus of the School of Planning and Architecture, New Delhi, she has master's degree in European urban conservation with distinction from the University of Dundee, Scotland in 2007. She is also the recipient of the UNESCO Award for Heritage Conservation in the Asia Pacific region, Award of Merit, Mahidpur Fort, and honorable mention for Doon School, Dehradun in 2016. Recognized as a global cultural leader by the European Union's cultural diplomacy platforms in 2016, she is also the recipient of Commonwealth Professional Fellowship 2011 as well as Scottish International Scholarship 2006. She has been a consultant to UNESCO, Asian Development Bank, World Monuments Fund, New York, as well as Willem Mason France, Paris, Embassy of France in India, Embassy of Kingdom of Netherlands in India. She is also a visiting faculty to Department of Urban Design at School of Planning and Architecture, New Delhi. Thanks.
Too many kind words, but today I'm just going to share my experience. I, uh, the topic that you gave me about adaptive reuse and the city is really close to my heart. I've been studying it for a while now, but when you decided to call me and talk about my experience, I was really wondering what I can say because you have such beautiful, you've put together a panel that has so much to say that it's going to be really difficult to put anything together. So I decided that today I'm just going to talk about my experience and what I think about it, and then we can all sort of discuss. So I'm really actually very emotional after seeing the film because it's very hard not to be moved by that. So really, our context is this. We are facing this on an everyday basis. Should we conserve? Should we develop? This is a day where every single day the newspaper tells us about some heritage building being demolished. And it's evoking emotional reaction from almost everybody. Everyone that we know is talking about once upon a time, how beautiful the city was, what and this nostalgia, I see a lot of people sharing old photos on Facebook, in WhatsApp, about how beautiful things were. And as an emotional reaction to the loss of what is happening is something that we saw in the movie just now, is the need to save. And this also is a kind of a British legacy that we are taking on, where in the 60s and 70s, these are campaigns that were being run in London to save even things like the Covent Garden or the Victorian buildings. So our immediate reaction to this loss is putting together things and trying to save the past and holding on to what we can. And we're doing a great job of it. There are so many people who are now coming together, so many citizens group wanting to save. And then sometimes we do get successful when we are able to protect these buildings. We have so many buildings that go up on the heritage list. These are just some newspaper articles that I put together to show you how as many as 800 buildings, 900 buildings suddenly find themselves on the heritage list. So from the heritage practitioner's perspective, this is always a win when you're able to put something into the heritage list. And then that brings about a lot of enthusiasm, and there are these hero projects which are showcasing that what can happen with them, mostly in the hospitality sector or in the art sector, and that's what everything talks about. But today I'm not here to talk about the hero projects, A, because I don't have any, but because I think that the reality really beyond the star anchors are the everyday heritage buildings that we saw in the movie just now. So beyond the nostalgia, this is what is happening to our heritage buildings, because the question that everybody is really asking is, where's the money? Everybody agrees that it's important to conserve history, it's important to conserve the past, but where is the money for it? Most buildings are crumbling, most buildings are getting demolished, and this is replacing it because this is the collective imagination of people when they want modern houses. So let's talk of the other side of the story. What happens when somebody finds out that their building has made it to the heritage list? This is just a couple of newspaper articles that I put together where heritage homeowners are expressing concern over heritage status. People are actually unhappy that one day they wake up and they find that their home has become heritage. And what does it mean to them? So we are going to talk about the story from the perspective of the homeowner, as my house is now heritage, what should I do? So I'm just going to really be sharing my experience, and I'm sure there are multiple points of view. This is just mine, and I'm happy to discuss things with you as we go along. So the first, and these are the kind of questions that do come to us almost every now and then. So every time I've met a homeowner whose name is on the list, the first thing he says is, I've become heritage, I can't do anything about it. That's the first perception that we really need to break, because even the law tells you, if you are grade 2 and grade 3, that adaptive reuse and interior changes will be allowed. And I think I wanted to really set the context to what we're going to talk about today about adaptive reuse in the city, saying that even with heritage buildings, adaptive reuse is stipulated by the law. Which brings us to my second myth that most people have, is that conservation is really about the past. It's about what was, etc., etc. If you hear people when they talk, most people say, I don't need conservation, I just need basic repairs to my house. Or heritage conservation is for museums and palaces, but ours is just an old home. So why are we even talking about the idea of conservation for heritage homes? So the first question is, anybody we meet who's a heritage homeowner asks us, why should I conserve my house? What's the big deal? Why should I do it? So I'm going to talk about 3 projects and my learnings from the 3 projects. The first one, which is a scenario, is because it's mandated by law. If you find yourself in a heritage list in any city, then what do you do? So this is the story of a family who lives in Old Delhi and who found themselves listed as grade 2B heritage homeowners and how they went about. The second scenario is when somebody, again, we are answering the question, why conserve? So the first one is because it's mandated by law, you don't have a choice. The second one is for the love of heritage. And this is a story of a family in Jabalpur who owned a heritage house, but it was not listed because Jabalpur doesn't have heritage listing process. But they did it because they were bringing in a new generation in a heritage home. They wanted to create a 21st century house for their son and his new bride. And the third one is a scenario where it's for the collective memory of a community. And what we were seeing in the movie was also that it may not be your house, but you still associate with it. You still think about it because it becomes the background to what you do in your everyday life. So a lot of times I also hear this third myth, which is that conservation is really easy. Someone, in fact, actually told me that what do conservation architects do anyway? It's just a glorified word for repair and maintenance. And you guys make so much noise about it, but what's the big deal? So the big deal is how to conserve, because we have everybody talking about it. We have lots of books and lots of diktats that tell us you must conserve, you must conserve, you must do this, you must do that. But how do you do it? How does a regular person know what to do? So most historic buildings are built before municipalities were invented, and therefore they don't ever have drawings. So most conservation projects actually start with preparing the first set of drawings of what existed or what was or what is, and then detailing to understand where's the problem. Because you're often dealing with a heritage building, there is bound to be problems. And then if you are a listed heritage building, then you need to go through the entire process of getting a heritage committee to tell you, okay, you can repair your building. The fact that when you are in a heritage list, you also have to seek permission before you even do anything to your building. So most people don't want to walk the conservation path because it's cumbersome. A lot of people tell me, it's my house, why should I go and ask a heritage committee what to do? Who are they to decide? And the other thing that is always thrown at our face is that conservation is really expensive. It's for rich people. It's not for us. So usually I say that sometimes it's about having a penny wise, pound foolish approach. A stitch in time saves 9, everybody knows. So if you're able to actually repair your building and maintain it regularly, you may not even need to spend that kind of money. So usually, this is a picture that most people will be fairly familiar with, that most historic buildings have these kind of cracks, they have seepage problems, they have all of that. What most people do then is, this is also a common scenario where you have so many buildings where you have plaster falling off, etc. And what people do is the regular solution. Either they go in for a product which claims that they can solve every problem. And TV advertising helps a lot, because suddenly you know that whether you buy Birla cement or Ambuja cement, your problems and water will never come again. And most people fall for that. And what happens then is they reach problems which becomes a bigger problem later on. So my philosophy or approach really is that innovation can actually save costs. So I'm going to talk about lessons that I learned in my projects. The first one really was that Jugaad is sustainability. Now, Jugaad is innovation in many ways, and this is my experience of it. So as I was telling you, that most people, they go and use these cement plasters on buildings because it's what they think is the right thing to do. But what that does to historic buildings such as these is you get dampness, which almost in this case was still about 8 feet high. It causes more damage than it helps. And then the buildings start getting weaker. There are, which can eventually lead to a collapse if not carefully checked. So in this case, the technical solution to this was, we had people come and tell us, put silicone injection, do this, do that. There's huge amount of chemistry available to deal with this problem. But we went back to the basic and we said, what can we do? Why is this problem actually coming? And this problem is coming because the construction material, which was brick and lime or chuna, is incompatible with cement, because the basic principle of construction says that you need to allow your building to breathe. The minute you put something which was designed or invented as an impervious layer, all it does is traps water. So all we did was replace the cement plaster with lime, and which brought us to the second question. Where do you get lime? You can go to a shop and buy cement, but can you go to a shop and buy lime? When we were doing the project, we couldn't. Now there are people who make the lime especially for restoration projects. So we actually had to create a solution where we were making lime at home, because this was a project where there was no land, there was just a courtyard. So we had to make our own lime, and with that we had to restore this building. Why I call this innovation was because there was hardly any money in this project. So we had to find solutions that were making sense. So for example, there were many cracks in this building, and because we wanted to repair it with lime mortar, we did a lot of research, and the expensive solutions were stainless steel rods and helifix solutions from the UK, which the owner just could not afford. But what he could afford was innovation. So this is our structural engineer, and he actually designed for us a stainless steel beam that may be inserted into the crack. And since our owner was, he used to own a utensil factory, he used to manufacture stainless steel utensils. So in his factory, he made the stainless steel beams himself. So actually it became free for him, and we were able to do the structural repairs with this homemade lime mortar and homemade stainless steel. And it's been 8 years, and the cracks have not appeared again. So The second strategy was, so that was strategy one, that jugaad is actually sustainability because it helps you move forward. The second strategy is recycling and reusing. We recycle almost everything, repair more than put new, because the reason is, of course, you don't get the kind of quality that existed at that time, the kind of wood that came, we don't get that today. But more than anything else, it's also the cost. If you try to make a fan light this size in teak wood today, it's going to be exorbitant. But the kind of repairing was much lesser. And I think the reason why the owner went in for that was primarily because it was saving cost. Then the third strategy that we really used in the project was that design was in the detail. Here I'd like to, talk about this project because there was so much structural distress in it. The entire flooring was completely risen. There was a through and through crack through the ceiling, through the flooring. And we wanted to put back this flooring pattern, and we did that with locally available black and white marble and also with local masons. This was, I think everybody in Calcutta is familiar with these kind of tiles because they are in most historic homes. These are the Minton tiles that were brought in from England. Now, we didn't have any money for this, and this was the sort of material palette in most rich Havelis at that time in Old Delhi. And then these were these Italian tiles that were that came from Italy, and most of the rich historic homes at that time had these tiles. But our Haveli was completely stripped off. If you can see on the photo on the left, these tiles are on the walls as a dado. Now we, in our Haveli, we didn't have any of the historic material left. So we looked at, this was the Chunamal Haveli, one of the most richest Havelis in Old Delhi, which had these materials. And we tried to look for salvage material. Our owner, who was a Marwadi family, was very skeptical because he said, I don't want anybody's old. It was not going with his really, belief system. Plus, we were not even able to find that kind of a quantity. So what we did is we basically replicated, we looked at, when we did our research, we found that there was a German website that was selling these tiles. These are very small tiles, about 4 by 4 for 90 euros each. Of course, we were not able to afford it. So what we did is So what we did was we actually measured these tiles and got them replicated locally in Delhi. And this tile then cost us about 27 rupees to make as compared to 90 euros that were being sold on the German website. And this is how we use them. Now, why were we so fixated on these tiles? There's also a technical reason for that, because everybody told me that, you want to use this homemade lime mortar for your restoration, great, go ahead and do it. But when you make kitchens and bathrooms, you will not be able to use them because your tiles will not stick. So we did lots of experiments. We tried with small tiles, big tiles, vitrified tiles, everything. We tried to stick them up to with the homemade mortar that we were making, and invariably they would fall off. And it was actually, I think it was the failures that really taught us and forced us to innovate. And then somewhere down the line, we realized that it had something to do with the surface area of the tile, because most of the historic monuments that we were looking at had these really small tiles all over the domes built in 15th, 16th, 17th century. So we realized that there was something to do with the surface area of the tile, and we tried with this 4 by 4 tile, and it worked. So the reason why we decided to put these tiles was because they were technically possible with the lime mortar that we had created in our Haveli. And so it definitely follows the aesthetic of the Havelis, etc. But there was a technical reason why we had done so. And so to keep the cost low of the project and looking at what the historic materials were, taught us a lot of lessons. Like, for example, there were these China mosaic floorings in the Haveli. Now, unfortunately, people in Delhi had forgotten to do China mosaic, and our only option was to get people from Ahmedabad. We spoke to many craftsmen, but a lot of them were not willing to come because they said that it's too less of work. It doesn't make any financial sense for us. We won't come. So then our owner was always in an enthusiasm wanting to get rid of these. So he would tell us, Nini, why don't we just put marble? Why don't we do something simple? Why you want to get into all of this? So eventually we ended up doing the China mosaic ourselves. So this was the craftsman, Tawfiq, and these are people who work in my office. And together we actually worked with our hands to create this China mosaic to show that it was actually possible. So there was a lot of, we didn't know it either. Most of us looked up YouTube videos, saw how to do it, tried to do it, failed, tried again. It was a lot of fun because I think the idea is, that's why I say that it's all about innovation. Anything is possible. It's just that we have to try it. The other lesson I learned through the project was that the architect is a decision maker. Unfortunately, when we study architecture, this is something that gets ingrained in us that, you know, we decide what happens in a project. We decide what the specifications are. We decide everything. All of that kind of got thrown out of the door when I was doing this project in Old Delhi, because more often than not, I was the judge. As you can see in this situation, the clients are on the higher pedestal, the contractor is standing below, and they are fighting. This was an everyday scene because they would just not get along. The client would feel that the contractor was fleecing him, and the contractor would feel that the client is really conjuice and not paying for his services. So we went through about a year of this happening every day until one day I realized that there was no contractor. He was finally thrown out. And that's when it dawned upon me that I had to be the contractor, because the labor just turned around and said, "Madam, what do we do now?" I think that was also a moment when I realized that what we say and what we prescribe, we better know how to do it, because if we don't, then it just completely falls flat. This project has been really interesting because I'd like to tell you a story here that this didn't start off as a restoration project. The gentleman here, Mr. Bagla, I met him by chance in the corridors of SPA looking for someone to be an architect, because he said that this was an architecture school, so I thought I'll find an architect there. It was my luck or my destiny that I met him. And he said to me that, "Look, I have 3 sons. I have an old house in the walled city. Can you spruce it up for me?" When I went to see his house, I realized that it was a grade 2 listed Haveli, and therefore we started the conversations of maybe we could restore it, and he said, "Restoration is not for me." So most of what I'm telling you today is almost 8.5 years of dealing with people and understanding it from their perspective. So in this case, I think over the 8.5 years, I played many roles. And architect was not one of them. It was like the last role. The first role I played was of a therapist, because I had to hear them out and what they wanted, and then also to explain to them what we were saying. For example, when we wanted to restore the Haveli, he said that restoration, why should I restore? I told him everything. I said, it's sustainable, it's important, it's for the heritage, it's for the city. It made no difference to him. He just said me, so. So one day I came up with an idea, and I told him, if you restore your Haveli, and this is a year-long process, it didn't happen overnight. After a year, I told him that I think if you restore your Haveli, when you get these prospective brides, they'll think you're really Khandani, and that clicked it. And I think the lesson I learned that day was, it wasn't important what I was saying, it was important what he was understanding. So if I didn't speak his language, we both wanted the same thing, but it wouldn't happen. And the other thing that I learned, and this strategy is really what keeps the cost of the project down, is what we call connectedness. Now, connectedness is something which is inherently there in every Indian person. And when I presented this project in Amsterdam a couple of months ago, people were like, wow. I said, what wow? This is how we are. And what is really connectedness? I'll tell you. Everybody knows somebody who gets a discount. So the whole keeping the cost out of the project was built on getting discounts. So for example, by the year 4 into the project, the client was completely sensitized. He really liked heritage, and he insisted that we go to Jodhpur to buy antique furniture for his house because it was heritage. It was quite a painful experience, because in Jodhpur you have these huge go-downs where you have completely dismantled Havelis from villages in Rajasthan and Gujarat up for sale and export. My heart was really breaking because I didn't want him to buy anything from there. And so we asked the prices and all of that. We were doing this exercise for 2 days when his wife, who was quiet through the entire process, finally said,
but why are we buying this scrap? We have the scrap already, it's there in the store. And so suddenly, out of the store started coming in their old furniture, which they had discarded as rubbish, and it was refurbished by their own carpenter. But what was important was, I have been telling this them all along, it never made sense until they made that trip to Jodhpur and got to know what the price of those antiques was. They got to know what they have was so valuable. Another exercise we did was when they wanted to buy the lights. So I had just done this project in Jabalpur and we bought these lights from this upmarket shop in Khan Market, and he had given us a 40% discount. So I told the owner that let's go there. I know those guys, they'll give us a good discount, we can go there. He said, no, we won't go to Khan Market, we'll go to Old Delhi wholesale market. So we went to this place, Bhagirath place in Old Delhi. He told me, and there's another reason why we'll go there. They kept a very good chart over there. So after we finish the light shopping, I will treat you to chart. So in the lure of the chart, we went to Old Delhi and we found the shop and we chose whatever we wanted. And I thought, great, my job is done, now I can get my chart. And he sat down and he told the owner that now you have to give me 40% discount. So he said, why should I give you 40% discount? This is a wholesale shop. So he says, yeah, but you gave her 40% discount when she bought it last time with her client, so I want my 40% discount. He said, she came to Khan Market, that was a retail shop. We give discounts there, we don't give them here. So then for the next 2 hours, he kept haggling with him and telling him that he knew his grandfather was a merchant and that they were the president of the merchant association, etc., etc. He kept finding some rishtedari, something to do until I got completely embarrassed and I said, uncle, I'm leaving. And he's like, no, we have to eat chaat. I said, next time. Because, so I walked out of the shop and I thought, this is done. We are not going to get these lights. And then a week later, I got a phone call. He says, come, we have to fix the lights. I said, you got them? He said, yeah. And I said, and did he give you discount? He said, of course. How could he not give me discount? I finally found one relative that he knew and I knew, and we got the discount. So it's normal for everybody that you know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody will get you a discount. But it actually helps because it kept the cost of our project really down. And so hangs in our locally made chandelier from Old Delhi, hangs very proudly in our Haveli. And then the last myth really was about restoring to original design. A thing that's constantly thrown back at us is like, this is our home, it's not a monument. So don't tell us, don't rip this and don't do that, and that's not, we live here, how can you tell us? A lot of people tell us that you live in comfortable houses in South Delhi, don't come and tell us that you can't put an AC or you can't do this or you can't do that. So then that's where I think the whole idea was, in this Haveli, we had like 3 phases of construction. The red ones were actually from the Mughal time, and then there was an entire revamp of the Haveli done in, which is shown in green, which was during the British times, and then there were extensions in the late 20th century. This is what I was saying. So when I actually told them that the idea is not to restore the Haveli to a Mughal time, but the idea is to create a 21st century home in a heritage building. The idea was to say it was possible to live in a heritage house comfortably as they would if they moved out of the walled city. And so I had to do a lot of work to convince him of that, because he was saying it doesn't happen. So this is what I was talking about a couple of minutes ago, about how I sold the idea of Khandaniyat to him to get him to agree to restore his Haveli. These are, it was a very interesting, even for me, technically the project was very interesting because we found a lot of archaeology. We found these pillars hidden in the foundations. We found the remains of a Mughal fountain in the courtyard of the Haveli. Now, from the technical perspective, one would want to showcase what we found, but they were just extremely upset that we had found this fountain, because they said it was bad luck and that we had destroyed something to do with the vastu of their house, etc. So we documented it and we closed it back, and therefore the real understanding is that the conservation strategy is not necessarily coming from the books and the diktats, etc., but it's actually coming from the people who live and in these houses and what they earn. So for example, this courtyard on the left is after we had closed it up, and they fell on bad times after this, and every time that auntie never forgot that I had opened it up, and she said, you shouldn't have done that, you know, it's because of that. So again, the main things that led the restoration process was also intangible things like Vastu. They were very much they believed in Vastu, and they made sure that everything that we did was Vastu compliant. So what I'm trying to say is it's necessarily not a textbook approach. It's also got to do with who's living in the house and what they want and how do you technically provide for that. Which brings me to my last point, that a lot of people always tell me there's no creativity in conservation. And I just want to show some before and after pictures of what was possible. This was the Haveli that we've been talking about. This is how it was before the conservation, and this was converted into a kitchen, again completely made on-site by carpenters with the homemade lime mortar. This is how the drawing room was before we started the work. This is what it was in the middle. This is the other side, and this is how it is now. And the family continues to live in this house. In fact, they continue to live in it through the entire project, which is why it took us almost 8.5 years to do. And this is the other, I just wanted to show that this is the other bungalow that we did in Jabalpur, where there was a series of disconnected stores that were connected to create this apartment. Just some pictures. This is an extension that was done for this apartment. And these were the bathrooms that were redone. So it sounds like it's a great idea and adaptive reuse is going to solve everybody's problems, but there are still critics, and most of them say these things. Number one, that adaptive reuse is rhetorical and it's unsustainable. Most people will tell you that adaptive reuse is elitist, it's only for rich people. What happens to regular people? What help is the government going to give me? A lot of people say that who's going to compensate my loss? If you try to tell someone, don't demolish your house, he just turns around and asks you, but if I give my house to the builder, I make millions. Are you going to give me money? I can save my house, but give me the money. And if you ask an investor or the builder to say that, why don't you do adaptive reuse? The most common question that gets thrown at us is, how much return on investment will I get? So I don't have the answers to these questions. That's the quest is still on. And because you requested me to say something about Chandannagar, I will say that the quest is still on. We're trying to restore a building. We're trying to do something new, something that is a collaboration between the community, the government, and professionals. And I will have more stories to tell maybe in a few years' time. But for now, that's it. Thank you.
So today is a very important day because we have 4 very important conservation architects who are going to run us through various options and solutions and questions. What is our future? Because this is our future, because half of Calcutta, we are always going as friends when we are traveling, and we just say, look at that building on the left, look at the building on the right, what's happening to it? It doesn't exist anymore. And the film was basically to set a mood for that before, from a photographer's point of view, you know? So also, as conservation architects, we need to understand what the people are thinking, what the artists are thinking. We need to all work together. So I would like to open the house. Anyone has any comments, observations?
Hi, I'm Anuradha. I just want to know that when you are actually doing this restoration work, the family is also living in that particular house. So is there, when you're actually dealing with the family on a day-to-day basis, what is actually their reaction? Because they also get very impatient when there is too much income, it's too many things are lying around, and there is problem in doing any regular stuff. So what is actually the problems you face while doing this kind of work, while the family is still living there? And how long they can actually stretch the time, because when you start a work, there is a time frame that you have to complete this work within this time. So how do you deal with that?
See, I think the reason is that if we have a buy-in from the family, if they know that this is for them, which they keep up with the inconvenience because it's for them, right? And the second thing with the timeline, in this case, it took us a long time because the finances were constantly drying up. So we would do portions, then not do portion for months, then again do something, and then again not do for a long time. If there was enough finance in the beginning and we were able to plan it differently, I think it would have taken 1/8 the time. But the thing with this particular project was, we didn't have the funds. So we had to go with what we had and slowly and steadily at this particular place. And I would say that when we started the project, the family was not very much into the whole idea of restoration. But over the years, I think when they started seeing things were moving, change was happening, it was turning out better. And I think the biggest thing came from their relatives. When their relatives started visiting and saying, "Bahut acha lag raha hai, it's looking really good, wow, hame bhi ye chahiye," that changed the ball game. So it's really about what they perceive and how it impacted their identity is what changed the whole ball game for them.
Aishwarya, as you have been talking about the economics, which is a very important part, and you have been working for a long time, do you think that we get a loan for house building loan, new buildings? So do you think that, I really don't know whether there is any special loan for renovation of own houses. I'm not sure. There may be, but there may not be very in a lucrative terms. So if you think some tax deduction scheme or softer loan schemes is policy-wise, if the government, do you think it will help these people to convince them? Because you have been working with all these people, homeowners.
Yeah, I think they tried this in Ahmedabad about 10 years ago, where HUDCO was giving soft loans to people to restore Havelis. I think there were some 10 pilot projects where they did try that. So if it worked in Ahmedabad, I don't see any reason why it will not work in other settings. As far as tax breaks are concerned, a lot of municipalities are giving the tax breaks, but the problem is that on old properties, the house tax is so low that even if the policy says house tax break or completely zero tax, the tax comes to some few thousand rupees. So it doesn't really help them because they are on the old rate. So actually, from the larger perspective, they are giving tax, they're ticking all the boxes. But what the implication of that is on the ground is changing from scenario to scenario. Because if they get a break of 5,000 rupees in house tax, it doesn't really motivate them to do anything. In Delhi, when the Commonwealth Games were happening, the government had announced some schemes. They said that if somebody converts their Haveli into a guest house or an art gallery, they would give them some 2 crore rupees loan. But some people took the loan, but then later they realized that it was not working. So then the scheme was kind of scrapped. So I think the main point is that there is a gap between policy and the ground, and it needs to be a bottom-up policy, understanding what the economics really are. More often than not, we have people who are making policy who are basing the policy on something that happened in Singapore or happened in London or happened somewhere else, but their socio-economic and political context is completely different. So if there are 1,600 buildings that are listed in London, it is because every city council will give them a matching grant. So if the restoration project is X, they will give X by 2, which doesn't happen in our case. So although we follow some of their systems, unless we follow the financial systems, heritage listing doesn't work.
And now Chandan Nagar. So these buildings, in the north are mostly built out of stones. And in eastern part of the country, most of the buildings in Bengal are brick and mortar.
This is also brick. The one I was showing was also brick with lime.
The one in Delhi, right. So, but vis-a-vis anyway, the construction, the cost of restoration must be much different, right? And the job, like what we've seen, for example, in the Neemrana, the restoration and the rebuild of the new wings, they could match it. And they could do it at a very reasonable cost, as I understand, compared to if it was done in Bengal. So do you have something to enlighten us on that?
See, honestly, I'm not really aware of the exact rates of construction that are happening in Bengal, so I will not be able to comment upon it. But what I have seen in Delhi is that, like I was showing through my project, sometimes you have to, the specifications that we do, the design that we do is really impacts on the cost. Like for example, if a particular, it also depends on the importance of that building. So for example, if you were restoring a grand building like the Victoria Terminus or the Victoria Memorial, you would want the best Italian, wherever the marble came from, you will go there and you will get exactly the same thing. But if you were doing someone's house, I think you have a bit of a flexibility, which is why the grading says grade 1, grade 2, grade 3. And in a grade 3 or a grade 2 building, you do have the flexibility to decide, do you really want to go for Burma teak or do you want to go in for something else? So I think technical decisions have a huge role to play in determining how much the cost of construction will be. Again, if you are restoring the building for hospitality purposes, you will do a different palette. If you are doing it for a home, you do a different palette. And it changes from person to person. Just like if you were to buy a flat in, say, South City, two people will not spend the same amount of money in redoing the same flat. I think that the same thing continues into heritage homes as well. It is a very personal thing because a home is a personal thing for the family that owns it.
A big problem which we face in a place like Calcutta is also that there's multiple tenants in buildings here. So I think that's a huge deterrent. And I mean, you showed us some examples of projects where probably there was single ownership. Now, how, I don't know, this is again a matter of policy or whatever, how do we actually deal with these houses, especially in Kolkata, where there are hundreds of tenants, and I have visited certain houses which are spectacular. They're like out of the blue, but unfortunately nothing can be done. They just told to, walk off that building, not even see it, unfortunately.
I think that happens everywhere. And the case that I was showing, this was a 2-courtyard house, out of which there was a partition in 1950. So the second courtyard didn't belong to the family. We worked only in the first courtyard and in the portion that they owned. However, I do understand what you're saying, and that's why in the last slide I said, while adaptive reuse is possible, there are still many questions that we need to answer. And one of those questions is, how does the government and policy deal with this? We don't have the climate to deal with this at the moment. We don't have it. So the answer to your question is, of course, we need to deal with it. And we need to address it via policy.
What you told about incentive, financial incentive, taxation and the taxation amount, whatever it works out, is peanuts. Now, what I have not been basically very active in this sector, but I am going back down memory lane. One workshop which I attended was 25 years back. And this workshop was basically about energy conservation in building. But I remember seeing 3 projects in Germany where what they did, they renovated the building, I mean, in terms of conservation. But what they did is that they incorporated, when you see it from inside, what I mean, it is just today's modern building in terms of efficiency. You see, if you look at many of these, the efficiency in today's terms, when you look at a heritage building, is not very high. Because what is efficiency? Efficiency would be what is the maintenance cost of a building. It is something, a consciousness that is totally absent in India, right? Now, the maintenance cost, the key elements are, then taxation becomes one of the elements, but very small in old buildings. Power consumption, water charges, and so on and so. Now, there are many places where power charges are exorbitant, and because of the inefficiency in terms of energy consumption pattern is very high. Now what happened? What they did, some of these public buildings, they treated as heritage building, But at the same time, suppose you look at it in financial terms, your expenditure on heritage conservation is X. Now suppose you add 20% to that, and what you are doing is you have done heritage conservation and you have done much better energy efficiency. So your return does not come from heritage component. It actually comes from energy conservation component. And you see, today's, I'm sure if you calculate, this energy bill will not be small. So if it is an old building, if you can incorporate as a part of heritage conservation as a total package, then it will work out quite a good incentive.
I'd like to share the story of what we were doing with this Haveli.
Yeah.
So the inherent planning of a Haveli with the courtyard in the center allows for cross ventilation and keeps temperatures ambient, because these buildings were built when there was no electricity. What happens is when we start closing ventilators and we start closing doors is when the buildings get claustrophobic and then you want to put AC. So I was trying to explain this principle to the family that actually you don't need AC because your building is designed in a climate responsive way. They didn't believe me, and they said that no, you're being biased. You have an AC in your house, why can't we have in ours? So I said, okay, I'll put it for you. You really insist you want to put it, you put it. So we put it in a way that it would, so they spent the money and they felt really nice that, chalo, we also have AC. I went to their house 4 or 5 months later and the lady is telling me, pata hai, hum to AC chalate hi nahi. Because humne darwaze khol diye and now it's so comfortable, we don't need the AC. I said, I was telling you this. But you wanted to spend those 70,000 rupees on putting a split AC so that your relatives, when they come, they say, haan, AC hai. They said, we hardly use it. So actually what you are saying is true. If you actually go with the inherent principles that these buildings were built with, most buildings have cross ventilation, most buildings have such a thermal mass that it doesn't become really hot within them. So I appreciate what you're saying, and you're right, that if you work with the energy and vernacular principles, you can keep the energy bill very down.
Thank you, Aishwarya.